quite certain that there is just about no one in this room who is not aware of the circumstance that the Gnostic and Christian tradition has been brought into the focus of the attention of the culture after many, in fact almost 2,000 years of neglect as the result of a particular discovery within the field of biblical archaeology, the discovery having occurred in the immediate aftermath of World War II near the Egyptian hamlet of Naj Hammadi in Upper Egypt, and has really created a great deal of interest, a certain amount of turmoil in both scholarly and let's say academic scholarly and lay circles. And it became known, almost became a buzzword under the name of the Naj Hammadi Library, the largest find of literature of that particular spiritual orientation, and almost of any of the ancient spiritual groups that was ever discovered. And as such, much of the material within it has been a great stimulus to not only academic study, but to the understanding of certain spiritual currents which originated or at least functioned within the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century AD, and the influence of which in various ways continued throughout history, although much of the time without being named as Gnostic or by any other name of that sort, but still being of that order. Now, that being the case, in these three discussions, tonight and the next 2 Fridays, we shall address ourselves in a very sketchy fashion to those scriptures within that library which by their own titles, their own definitions, are called Gospels. Now, that being the case, it may be useful for a minute or two to cast a glance as to what a Gospel really means. I knew what it means in German, I knew what it means in Hungarian or in French, but I really had no idea for quite a long time as to what the real derivation, the etymological derivation of the word was. And it may well be that you are not vitally interested in it either, but as usual I will tell it to you anyhow. The word gospel, which is the translation into English of the Greek evangelion or the Latin evangelium, is, believe it or not, comes from the Old English word of God spell. Now, whether that word makes a great deal of sense or not, I am not going to pass a judgment on it, but in any way it indicates a sacred thing, a sacred text which perhaps may have an influence, something in the nature of a spell on those who read it or to whom it is exposed. And within Christendom, although such was not the case originally, in very early very early Christian history in the apostolic age, it would seem, according to some evidence, that there were all kinds of gospels around, and that they did not necessarily refer to the life and to the words of the founder of the Christian tradition, to Jesus Christ himself, but that really any sacred scripture that promised to take the reader to a deeper consciousness, a deeper understanding of spiritual things, was referred to as a gospel or as a God spell. Now, conversely, the Greek and the Latin names for such scriptures, Evangelion and then Evangelium in Latin, indicate a happy message. Whenever you have a Greek word, my Greek friend has departed. We had a Greek gentleman here for a few Fridays. V or the EU, which in Greek is the same, is attached to a word that means happy. Eureka. Eureka, you know. And that therefore the Evangelion is the happy message, a message that would generate and spread joy. And that was taken over into the Latin as well. Now, I'm sure that you are now tremendously inspired and enriched by these disclosures which relate to words, so I will move from them to the content of these. Now, we know, of course, that eventually by a selective process, this story, of course, will not be accepted by most fundamentalist Christians, that as the years went on, first century, second century, a selective process took place wherein many of the scriptures that counted as gospels, as good news, happy news, up to that time, were phased out. And finally, the number of such scriptures to whom authority was ascribed to by the ecclesiastical authorities really boiled down to 4. And they, of course, as we well know, are the so-called canonical gospel. The canon, once again in Greek and in Latin, merely means an authoritative record. So when something is canonical, it means this has been admitted into the literature that was considered and is considered authoritative, such as Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, the so-called canonical Gospels. Now, with that, we can now move to the Gnostic Gospels, and as I say, it was fairly well known to historians that there had been other Gospels, and that some of these, at least initially, were of such content that their authority resided in the very likely possibility that they contained primarily the words of the founder of the Christian religion, of Jesus Christ himself. But still, the way the selection occurred, curiously enough, the 4 canonical Gospels just mentioned are primarily narratives that pretend, shall we say, I shouldn't be disrespectful of the scriptures, but let's say, pretend to tell the events in the life of Jesus Christ. While other Gospels were not narratives, and it's such a one that we are going to be concerned with today, because once again, it has been known in history that there was among others, that there was a gospel that was fairly highly regarded, and that was undoubtedly present in written form almost certainly as early as the 2nd or the early 3rd century AD, and that this gospel was attributed to St. Thomas the Apostle, just like the 4 canonical ones are attributed to other apostles. So let's say the rumor of a gospel written by Thomas the Apostle has been around for a long time. And this in itself is of considerable significance, and I will probably spend once again a little bit too much time on the figure now of the Apostle Thomas, because let's say the likely source of this gospel is of very great importance, and those who only read the canonical Gospels or have them read to them, or whatever the case may be, tend to immediately think of an unpleasant description of the Apostle Thomas as doubting Thomas. The reason for it being that in one of the canonical scriptures, there is an episode mentioned that is chronologically said to have occurred subsequent to the resurrection of Jesus, wherein Jesus appears to his apostles and disciples, at that time the apostle Thomas, wishing to assure himself that an actual miraculous and bodily resurrection has taken place, would go up to Jesus and touch him and actually put his fingers into the wounds left there by the crucifixion and things of that sort. Now, let's say the likelihood is, and I would side with that likelihood, is that this story, which has gotten into the canonical scriptures, was put there with a malicious purpose to make Thomas look bad. But let us say intentions in a book, ascribed to a figure in a book, intentions are a matter of guesswork, and therefore we cannot be certain of that. But it is quite likely. Now, the name of this, first of all, you all know that 12 of the much larger number of disciples of the founder of the Christian religion, 12 of them were named apostles, and they were regarded as the chief messengers of the good news of the Evangelion, and the ones who were commissioned by Jesus to go forth into the world and to teach his message. Now, among these 12, definitely in all the most respected scriptures, there appears one whose name was not just Thomas, but Didymos Judas Thomas. Judas, incidentally, was a fairly popular name and has become disreputable only because of the New Testament stories of Judas being the traitor, the betrayer. So Didymos is a Greek word. You need to remember that even though people say, oh, you have to know Hebrew, you have to know Aramaic, and this and that, the sacred scriptures of the first 3 or 4 centuries are written in Greek. Why? Because Greek was the respectable, the intellectual tongue. So if you were interested in politics or the military and you wanted to serve the imperial power of Rome, then you learned Latin. If you wanted to do other things that had to do with spiritual and intellectual matters and poetry and drama and all those things, then you learned Greek, because Greek was the intellectual language. In fact, some studies have been made, and these are also the little vignettes again, which you may not consider terribly important, but studies have been made to the effect that the Greek idiom that apparently Jesus used in speaking, and once again you have to remember the first Gospels, the first sacred scriptures were, as I say, that were available and studied were all in Greek, and that the speeches therein recorded of Jesus show an indication that whoever uttered those sentences was very familiar with the Greek language and in fact spoke a very elegant Greek, similar to the great Greek teachers such and orators such as Demosthenes and others, and so somehow the notion that you were dealing here, with a humble carpenter, from Nazareth, and all this sort of populist business falls to the ground already on linguistic grounds. But of course, certainly to Gnostic, that would not represent a difficulty, because in the Gnostic and mystical tradition, Jesus is regarded as a supernatural being who has access to knowledge, to material, and to linguistical expressions of all kinds, all sorts of kinds, and not. But this is the way. This is the way that many prophetic religions work. For instance, one of the latest prophetic religions in the world is originated in America, and it is known as the Church of the Latter-day Saints of the Mormons. And there you also find in the Mormon historians that there is a definite effort to make Joseph Smith appear as a little better than the founding prophet, a little better than an ignoramus, like what in German you would call a Dummkopf, and therefore when he has his prophetic mission, the fact that from a simple country boy born in upstate New York, and so when the simple country boy all of a sudden begins to preach and to write in a very elaborate language, that that is the proof that he is a prophet. So that custom of making the prophet appear at first very simple, and then a genius is present in various schools of prophetic religiosity. Now, in any event, undoubtedly the popular language, the common tongue, was at that time very frequently Aramaic, but there is absolutely no proof, and I fought battles about this with various scholars and writers. There is absolutely no proof that Jesus and the apostles spoke Aramaic all the time, or that the original scriptures were written in Aramaic. When you find scriptures nowadays which say, well, this is the Aramaic scripture, then you need to remember that what that scripture is something retranslated from the Greek into Aramaic. So in any event, this is a little linguistic excursion, which perhaps again was not all that important, but was there. In any event, Didymos in Greek means the twin. And so the name Thomas the twin is sort of the main name of this particular apostle. And Judas, which was a very common name at the time, is also inserted there. Now, some of the most active scholars of recent decades, subsequent to the Nag Hammadi discovery, among them Elaine Pagels, who was really the great pioneer in the exegesis of the Gnostic Gospels, have felt that the twin, the title the twin, meant that he was regarded so close in his spirit and in his personality to the Savior, Jesus, that he could be regarded as Jesus' twin. So not a physical twin, but rather someone who is spiritually the image of this person, like a twin would be. So it's really a very high praise of Thomas. Now, in the heterodox traditions, such as the Gnostics, and even just other interested Christians who like good stories, there's a great deal of narrative of an interesting and mysterious and in part even mystical nature attached to the Apostle Thomas. And much of these were contained in a scripture that is not part of the Nag Hammadi library, but that was available earlier as an apocryphon and was read sort of as a sacred entertainment in monasteries and other places of Christian learning, pretty much all through Christian history. And that is a scripture called the Acts of Thomas. Now, in the Acts of Thomas, you primarily have data, storyline that pertains to the Apostle Thomas's life and death subsequent to the resurrection of Jesus, when Jesus was not on earth again. And I'll tell you again just a little bit of vignette about it, because that in itself, I think, is a very important scripture, and it, let's say, it may represent the authoritative background to the Apostle Thomas. because in the Acts of Thomas you find out so much about the personality and about the actions of the Apostle Thomas, that when you then discover a Evangelion Kata Thoman, according to Thomas, then it bestows a certain authority on the Gospel of Thomas that otherwise might not be there. Anyway, in the Acts of Thomas, I really have to summarize because otherwise I won't read you not even a single saying from the Gospel of Thomas. The storyline is to the effect that Jesus is gone, has ascended to heaven, the apostles are trying to do their own work of conversions and so forth, and Jesus, the resurrected one, the Redivivus, as he appears in the very first volume of the Gospel of Thomas, right, appears to Thomas. And he tells Thomas that he wants Thomas to go to India. Now, I don't need to remind you that going to India in search of a guru or something like that was far less popular than in the 60s, if you come to the first and the second century. Very few people went to India to find the guru or for any other purpose, except maybe some occasional commercial. And so Thomas backs up and goes, gets on the boat in order to sail to the Indies. And on the way he already has some astonishing mystical experiences, which I'm not going to recount to you except allude to them very briefly at this point, because they are definitely of a Gnostic or Gnosticizing character. What the experiences that are attributed to Thomas, Didymus Judas Thomas, in the Acts of Thomas are, let's put it this way, they are not your evangelical Bible-thumping Christianity, but a very, very symbolic, a very mystical approach. And the only thing, for instance, he is led, and I'm not going to tell you at this time how he is led in a mystical way in a city where he stops on the way to India and disembarks from his ship. He is led to a transcendental event, which is a celestial wedding feast. And the implication being, and pretty much attested by the scholars, is that it is the heavenly wedding of the divine Sophia with the divine Christ. So there are already, in addition to the fact that he carried on conversations with the resurrected Jesus and so forth, indicates that Thomas does not find his consciousness confined to relatively mundane things, but rather very exalted, very ecstatic kinds of experiences of gnosis. Then I'll conclude with, then he goes to India and eventually is martyred, is killed in India because he converts various people whom other people there don't want to be converted, and then he is buried in a locale that to this day is called St. Thomas Mountain, outside of what now is called the city of Chennai, and which until comparatively recently was known as Madras in the south of India, which is has some special qualities to those of us who are interested in the 19th century gnosis of theosophy, because that is where Madame Blavatsky and her associates established the headquarters of the Theosophical Society, and it still is the international headquarters of the Theosophical Society to this day. So it's a kind of a sacred place. There is even, as some of the travelers told me, there is also a little bit less known than these data. There is also a Madonna shrine of a white Madonna, quite close to the city of Madras, which is a place of pilgrimage, and that a lot of people go there. Not only Christians, but worshippers of the goddess, the goddesses of the Hindus. Some Sikh people go there, and so forth. But all that is there by Saint Thomas Mann. Now, we had a conversation some years ago in Chicago when the World Parliament of Religions was held there with the Archbishop of the St. Thomas Christian, or where it has Syrian Orthodox Christian in India Church, Mar Paul Gregorius, who quite forthrightly told us that, first of all, St. Thomas was in India. He was buried there at a certain point in history, and they have records of it. His remains were taken back to the Middle East, to where he originally is supposed to have come from, to, I think, in Aleppo, but certainly in contemporary Syria. And he said that our church has used, so these were his words, our church has used the Gospel of Thomas for a long time. And then various people in the Syrian Orthodox Church, Middle East, asked us not to use it publicly anymore, and then we ceased. But we are very much aware of the Gospel of Thomas, and we respect it highly. Now, this should be my introduction, and if I don't proceed very quickly now to the Gospel of Thomas itself, and then the entire evening will be an introduction. But let us say there is absolutely no doubt, on the basis of several items of evidence of this sort that I now outline, that this was a very important, a very prominent, a very unusual early Christian teacher who was greatly respected throughout the Christian church, and whose message was fairly universal. It also said that, for instance, the Manichaean church, the church of the Prophet Mani, had used the Gospel of Thomas. So let's say it should sort of establish as much as we can in our minds the credentials of Thomas. Now, another great difference between the Gospel of Thomas and, say, the four canonical Gospels and various other early Christian scriptures is that its format is not that of a narrative. The Gospels of the four canonical Gospels are all story, which is, of course, a way of communicating wisdom. But they are the story, basically the story of Jesus and how he was born, how he lived and died and resurrected. The Gospel of Thomas, which has now been discovered, is not a story. It is a collection of sayings, the technical Greek term for that in scholarship is logia, because a logos is a word. So it is a collection of sayings, all of which are attributed to Jesus. So the presumption being that somebody, possibly the Apostle Thomas himself, who was there, collected things that Jesus said and then wrote them down. This means, of course, that there is often very little connection between one saying or attributed to Jesus and another, because they are individual sayings, usually a long sentence or two, attributed to Jesus, and very often preceded by the words, Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. No commentary, no exegesis, but there it is. Such exposition, exegesis, such as there is, seems to be implicit in the saying itself. Although perhaps if we look at it from a contemporary point of view, we can make various exegetical remarks as well. Now, I have given a lot of lectures and written to some extent in depth about the Gospel of Thomas, and I would recommend to you, if you want to have an introduction, an entry into the material of the Gospel of Thomas, if you pick up one of my books, which is called Jung and the Lost Gospels, in which I have chapters on the four Gnostic Gospels, and I have there collected somewhat appeared to me to be some of the most important sayings. They are in there, quoted, with some commentary. So that would be a good introduction to the material, in addition to such introduction as we can present here. So now I will just jump around in the text. There are great many sayings, and pick out some of them and try to do a little one-two exegesis explanation of them now. So there is one little paragraph which is usually referred to as the poem, being the first thing, which also contains the number one logion, and here is the poem with the number one logion. These are the secret words which the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote. And then comes the first saying, and he said, whoever finds the explanation of these words will not taste death. And this is Logion was the first saying. So there are a number of key expressions here which sort of give the story away, that we are dealing here with a scripture or collection of sayings of an esoteric tradition. And of course we speak about the esoteric traditions here quite often. The living Jesus speaks secret words. Now the living is a key. The living is the same thing that in Latin we call redivivus, or maybe that in Greek we call anastasios, which means the resurrected one. In other words, he who has come back to life. So it's the resurrected one who is speaking, the living Jesus. And he speaks secret words. Now, that is also of considerable importance, because there is, right at the very beginning, in the first saying, there is the indication, these are not things that were given to everyone. And these are not things that will even make all that much sense to you unless you have gnosis, unless you approach them with a kind of consciousness that can appreciate and assimilate this kind of material. That is why they are secret. Things are secrets to people who don't have the moxie to understand them. That's the way it always is. If you don't understand something, oh well, that must be a secret because a secret to me, But on the other hand, there is also a big message in that, in the sense that, life is full of secrets. And the disclosures of great teachers are also full of secrets. And why are they such? Because they are a challenge to you and I to understand. So it means that we have to employ our consciousness in order to discover the complete and the full meaning that is there. And this, of course, is rather contrary to what Christianity has become, because as though there are no secrets, there is nothing concealed, everything is out there right away. Well, if that is the case, then why are there so many stupid Christians? Well, there are just as many as there are stupid Muslims, there are stupid Buddhists, or whatever the case may be. But the issue is that something with the words, with the disclosures, and as we define with the Gospel of Philip, the initiatory, the sacramental deeds of a great teacher, there comes the need for understanding, for assimilation, for taking it into our psyche, which unfortunately in the self-styled Bible-believing Christendom has sort of gone out of fashion. It's not enough to just read something, it's not enough to just mouth something, you have to understand it. It shouldn't be so difficult to understand this point. For heaven's sake, if you pick up, you pick up Sherlock Holmes, who is one of my old favorites, there too, if you just read it, and you don't make an effort to understand what Sir Arthur Conan Doyle intended to write within there, then what are you doing? You're wasting your time. So with every kind of literature, with every kind of disclosure, there must be an effort on the part of the reader, or if it's a speech on the audience, to understand as well as possible and on various levels the meaning, because these are the secret words. Now, I think that's a good enough basic keynote, so we can go on to the next. That was the first thing. The second saying is, let him who seeks not cease seeking until he finds. And when he finds, he will be troubled. And when he has been troubled, he will marvel, and then he will reign over the all. This is the number 2 problem. What is really described here in a very direct and very poetic fashion is the path of understanding. This is what may happen to someone who is stimulated, initiated, empowered by these words. This is what you can expect. So be prepared for the results of dealing with these secret words. Now, let's take a look at them because this really requires a little explanation. That if you are seeking the higher life, seeking the spiritual life, don't cease seeking. It's very easy to be discouraged in this field as in many others. Absolutely. Why? Because what you are doing is an unusual thing. You know, you are not dealing here with some commonplace text, but something that you are reading because by reading it and by working on it with your consciousness, something will happen inside of you. It's not information, but it is transformation or inspiration that's supposed to happen. And that's difficult for people to understand because they can say, well, all these books out here, and look at all the stuff on the computer, all information. You know what? This is not the same kind. Yeah. This person is not here to inform you as much as to help you to become what you are supposed to become. He is not an informer, but he is a transformer. Yeah. And these are, of course, trite expressions. But the C.G. Jung, for instance, and or others of his kind, would of course say, yeah, because what is intended here is to bring about essential, very important and lasting change in the person, in the reader, or if it's read to you or whatever. You are supposed to change as the result of this. And why? Because that's what this being whose words are recorded here or are said to be recorded here, that's what he was here for, in order to help you change. He wasn't here to give you information. He wasn't here for any worldly reason or even intellectual reason, but he was here in order to help you accomplish that task which you are supposed to accomplish, which is to change into the direction of wisdom, into the direction of being closer to the source of the great mystery from whence the teacher has come. So individuation, you would have called it, it can be called by various ways, but teacher came in order to help you to become more than what you are at this time. And not just more physically or emotionally or intellectually, but spiritually in terms of your contact with transcendence. And that is, so that this is what happened. Let him do not cease seeking until he finds. And when he finds, what will be the first sign when you have found this? It will be that you will be troubled. Now that's a rather discouraging statement, because it seems that we are troubled enough before we have found something. You know, and we just look at how we have been troubled and still are troubled, and heaven knows how long the inducements to being troubled may endure in this world over the last few years. I mean, listen, I've been around now 91 years in this world, and I tell you that only once, for a period of time in my life, was I as troubled as I have in the last few years. So, we will be troubled in that respect, but that the spiritual effort, the spiritual quest, should also trouble us. That is maybe just a little bit too much. We get trouble enough otherwise. However, it is of course to be understood that what is dealt with here is that when the transformative change, the alchemy takes place within the human psyche, that especially the feeling tone results of that are that there is a perturbation in the psyche. Lots of people are not aware of that, and consequently the changes that they undergo are not all that important, because they want to feel better, they want to feel nicer, they want to walk into the light, you see, they want to experience miracles, and so forth. Yeah, yes, well, maybe that is there, that is part of it, but you know what? To get through to the other realm, to the realm of spirit, at least as the process goes on, you know what, folks, that is problem. And if you look into the lives of the saints, if you look into the lives of people who have really accomplished a great deal of things, they all were troubled. And this has to be accepted. There is a stirring up of the psyche within. There is the alchemical vessel is beginning to boil and bubble, toil and trouble, hopefully not, but that is so that has to be understood, that there are points in this transformative process, in this process of gnosis, that are troublesome, but they are troublesome for a purpose, they lead somewhere. So when he says that he will be troubled, and then when he has been troubled, then he will marvel. I think that's a very interesting to marvel. What is a marvel? Merveille in French means miracle. So he will find himself, the person who is involved in this, will find himself undergoing a miracle, being in a miraculous situation, marvel, merveille. And when he marvels, that indicates the next stage, as it were. He will marvel, and then he will reign over the all. Now, does this mean that there is some kind of sort of a monarchical metaphor meant here, that as you often find the evangelical visions that so, when we are in the, we will wear, in fact there is a song like that, when the battle is over, we shall wear a crown, we shall wear a crown, we shall wear a crown. Now what is that? Well, this is again, the wishful thinking that we are going to increase in stature, we will be like spiritual kings. And that is not entirely mistaken, but what it means here, that now when the individual has undergone these things, now the person's consciousness is in a place where it is above and beyond and in a commanding position over the mysteries of the psyche. You are, maybe you thought sometimes thought that you were in charge, but you were not. Everything else is in charge. The guys in Washington are in charge. For heaven help us, the people in Sacramento are in charge. Everybody else is in charge. Everybody tries to hold it over us. When you have listened to the secret word, when the change is taking place, you reign over people. You are in charge of your physical, emotional, intellectual, intuitive, and spiritual self. For the first time, you are in charge. Why? Because you made contact with and identify with the utmost center of your being, with the ultimate self. You have come into the royal chamber from whence you can exercise this kind of sovereignty over reality, over your internal reality. And that, of course, is the sign of transformation. Those are the accompanying signs of the stone of the philosophers and all the great. Let me read a few more sayings to you. Jesus said, this is usually the way the paragraphs begin. Jesus said, if those who lead you say to you, see, the kingdom is in heaven, then the birds of heaven will precede you. And he could have said with the American idiom, and that would be for the birds. In any event, and then the birds of heaven will precede. If they say to you, it is in the sea, then the fish will precede you. No. But the kingdom is within you, and it is without you. It's here, and it is there. It's there, and it is there. It is there, and it is there. It's about the kingdom that is everywhere. So it says, the kingdom is within you and without you. If you know yourselves, now here is the focus of this saying. If you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will know that you are the sons of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you are in poverty, and you are poverty. So the culmination of this saying is the allusion to self-knowledge. Self-knowledge, which is certainly one expression that can be used for gnosis. So we are here to, you might say, of course, that we are here to know God, which is not incorrect, but let us say, owing to the extroversion of the monotheistic worldview, it can be a little bit misleading. But I also I don't know what the current literature is, but I grew up a Catholic boy, and I memorized the catechism. And I do remember, of course I remember it in Hungarian, I do remember the very beginning of the catechism, which is, why are we here on earth? And then the answer is, we are here on earth in order to know God, in order to love God, and in order to serve God, and thereby attain to salvation. It's quite a bit of gnosis. But it starts with what? It starts with knowing. Not just, yes sir, I'm going to follow the commandments, yes sir. And you know what, it doesn't make any difference whether those commandments are in a Catholic source or in a Baptist source or in a New Age source that, you don't eat any meat, don't do this, don't do that. it's again, you know, folks, that's not where it's at. It's somewhere else. It's a subtlety. And of course, there are a number of sayings in the Gospel of Thomas which say, don't worry about what you eat and what you drink, but worry about who you are and how you walk. Because those are the truly important issues. So, if you do not know yourself, then you are in poverty and you are poverty. And what is that? Why is poverty used as a metaphor? I think it is because it means that when you have no appreciable measure of self-knowledge, then you are impoverished. You don't have the resources to deal with your encounter with reality. And you are deprived of the one great treasure that you really should have. By the way, this saying, which refers to the birds and refers to the fish and so forth, this was actually available since about the 1920s, because there was a find of a smaller number, just a few papyruses, a smaller number of sayings of Jesus found on the shores of the Oxyrhynchus River in Egypt, which came to be referred to by scholars as the Oxyrhynchus papyrus. And in that there were many sayings, and these sayings, not as many as the Gospels. These sayings were all discovered subsequently in the Gospel according to Thomas, meaning that they were extrapolated from there and then somehow ended up in the river. And this was one that if the kingdom is in heaven, well then those who are flying around in heaven will have it, and if it is in the sea, then the fish will have it. So it's not outside of yourself. It's not in any secret external locations. Where is it? Well, I think in modern psychological terms we would say it is in the psyche. It is in the depths of the psyche. And of course there are a deal of evidence in sacred Christian literature to that effect, where St. Paul refers to it, the Christ in you, the hope of glory. Now, a little bit more. Now we have that was the third program of saying, this is the fourth program. Jesus said, and this is most of the sayings are accompanied by that, or introduced by that, the man old in days, over Jesus Christ, I'm referring to me, the man old in days will not hesitate to ask a little child of 7 days about the place of life. That's not very likely that I will do it, because 7 days would be difficult to communicate in any other. And he will live. For many who are first shall become last, and they shall become a single one. So once again, the issue being that the important, the all-important elements of life are here. If we look for them, we will discover them, and they will redound to our benefits. And the metaphor can even indicate that you can ask it from a little child. And by the way, both mainstream Christendom and Gnostic Christendom have always had a great deal of reverence for the symbol of the little child. Of course, we are moving into the very season where the Gesù Bambino, the child of Jesus is there, And as to Gnostics are concerned, Valentinus, the great Gnostic mystic, uh, has recounted that the way he came to Gnosis was that he was walking on the road. I think it was in Italy, because Valentinus lived most of his, he came from Carthage, lived most of his life in Rome. And then he went to Cyprus, I think, before he died. Anyway, he said he was walking on the road, and in front of him on the road was a little baby. And he looked down and he asked the baby, "Who are you?" It was obviously a mystical vision. And the baby looked at him and said in a strong voice, "I am the Logos. I am the Word of God." So, let's say the symbolism of the child, or the wise child, as Alvin Kuhn used to call it, the very important one. And it's not just innocence, but it is, well, I suppose that every individual dealing with these symbols has to kind of work it out himself. But I think the child, the little child, and the infant, in fact, to me indicates that here the Logos is concentrated. It is all there. It is this little body, and this is the little body of wisdom. So pay attention to it. And that is by no means to be disdained. So for many who are first shall become last, and they shall become a single one. So that's an elaboration of the biblical saying also. And the issue, of course, being that the order of cognition and the various processes of discovery and of gnosis, once some of these greater experiences, once we discover the Christ child within ourselves, then these also change, and we have to pay attention. Now here is another one. Jesus said, "Know what is in thy sight, and what is hidden from thee will be revealed to thee. For there is nothing hidden which will not be manifest." So once again, this is a description of gnosis, indicating if you really know what is in front of you, if you know what is before us in our sight, if you really knew what is going on right here in this room, then it could open up the knowledge of the all. So therefore, look for the knowing of wisdom, look for the mystical knowing wherever you are, because it can disclose itself to you almost any time. For there is nothing hidden which will not be manifest. So use your life, your occupation, the things that you do, when you're cooking your meal. That is, if I would advise that you cook goulash or a Wiener Schnitzel. But in any event, whatever you do, if you concentrate on it, if you dedicate what you are doing to the higher purpose of gnosis, mysteries will disclose themselves. And that is indeed important. It is indeed true. And it has manifested in the lives of some of the great saints. There were some of them who were cooks in a monastery, dishwashers, this or that. And while they were doing their ordinary chores, the ineffable greatness manifested to them. So whatever you are engaged in, whatever you are doing, number one, dedicate it to a higher purpose, okay? Which can be known. And then see whether a transcendental meaning is likely to arise therefrom. And often it is. Once again, you read the lives of the saints, you read the lives of some of the great teachers, their disclosures of great mystical truths, especially regarding the depths of the soul, came to them under very mundane circumstances, because they had the ability to see through the external and to perceive it as an opener of the way. And that, of course, is a great thing and a great gift. Here is another one. The disciples asked him, namely Jesus, they said to him, "Wouldst thou that we fast? And how should we pray? And should we give alms? And what diet should we observe?" See, somehow that doggone business about the diet, the vegan, the vegetarian, the this, that, or the other thing, it always intrudes itself. I suppose because in order to survive, we all have to eat, and then we try to find some meaning in that generally. Yes, but so what does Jesus answer? And you know that the Jewish religion is full of dietary rules, kosher, this and that, and the other thing. And he doesn't even respond to that part. He says, "Do not lie, and do not do what you hate, for all things are manifest before him. For there is nothing hidden that shall not be revealed, and there is nothing covered that shall remain without being uncovered." And of course there are corresponding, although somewhat different sayings in the Gospel of Matthew, for instance, when he says that when you fast, when you pray, when you give alms, be of the right dedication. So it's very important again. And maybe one thing that we also derive from it, that we are always concerned with what shall we do, or what shall we not do. Maybe that's not as important as we think it is. Maybe being is more important than doing or not doing. But we are a human race who are oriented to doing stuff. And if we don't have something to do, then we feel that we are not accomplishing it. And yet, let's say, the contemplative, the mystical tradition indicates that maybe you should look a little more inside. Maybe you should be less concerned with what you do as you are with who you are and who you are trying to become. Now here is one that has given the scholars, including one particular scholar whom I knew. He wrote an entire book about it, but in any event, the seventh globion, Jesus said, "Blessed is the lion which the man eats, and the lion will become man. And cursed is the man whom the lion eats, and the lion becomes man." Now, the lion is a frequent reference to the demiurge. In other words, the lion face power, RE. And it's interesting that the word for lion, and I love languages and I love words. The word for lion in all kinds of languages always contains the syllable R or Arslan in Persian and in Armenian, in a whole number of words, and the even in the Hungarian language, the name for lion is Oroslan, which is Arslan, once again. So I think the important thing is that the lion face power, this is the devourer of the world, the demiurge, who is it's a wild power that interposes itself mythologically between the human consciousness and the divine consciousness. And so obviously I was talking to some people who were familiar with the lion symbol. And therefore, as I said, blessed is the lion which the man eats, and the lion will become man. So what does that mean? We can incorporate into ourselves this entity, this spiritual power that is symbolized by the lion, when we take the demiurgic nature into ourselves and transform it, then we are dealing with an entirely new situation. And then he says, and cursed is the man whom the lion eats, and the lion will become man. So the trouble with most people is that they are being eaten by the lion. The lion being the power, the power of extroversion, the power of the demiurge, the power that makes us engage in external things instead of discovering that which is truly important. So this is the big metaphor between the lion and the man, the lion-faced power. And let's see. Now this is actually quite, this is a short one. Jesus said, I have cast fire upon the world, and see, I guard it until the world is afire. It's really only one sentence. Now, how can we relate ourselves to that? The teacher, the Logos, the embodiment of the supreme wisdom comes and sets fire upon the world, and he guards it until the world is afire. And what this really means is that it's the alchemical fire of transformation, that which changes. He has come here in order to instigate big spiritual change, and he not only that, they didn't only start it, but the presence of the Logos, the presence of the teacher is there, and he guards it until the fire of transformation really takes place, which I think is a great move, because it indicates that we don't have to do it all ourselves. But the spiritual presence is there, and it will help us to accomplish. Now, unfortunately, time is fleeting, as the poet said, and look at all these things that I have here. Good heavens, good heavens, good heavens. In any event, let's see. So 19 Romeo, and I'm just fishing around. Jesus said, "Blessed is he who was before he came into being." Now you see, these are the Gnostic paradoxes. If you become disciples to me and hear my words, the stones will minister unto you, for you have 5 trees in paradise, which are unmoved in summer or in winter, and their leaves do not fall. Whoever knows them will not taste death. So, once again, it's a reference to transformation. And I think this is probably another saying, the 70th saying. Jesus said, if you bring forth that within yourselves, that which you have will save you. If you do not have that within yourselves, then that which you do not have within you will kill you. There are some tough sayings of this sort. So what are we dealing with here? What is it that we have within ourselves? We have within ourselves the seed, the potential of ultimate transformation. It is within ourselves already. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be put there by anyone. It doesn't have to be come about in any such way, but it is there. So if indeed that which we have within ourselves will save us, if we bring it forth, if we bring forth that within ourselves. So that there is the task. We have to bring forth something that is present, something that is hidden, but that is extremely important and yet extremely powerful. And it's not something that comes in from outside, but it is within us already. And on the other hand, if by some mischance we do not have that within ourselves, then that lack, the lack of the presence of transcendence in us and in our lives will kill us. I don't think it really requires a great deal of additional exegesis. And this is, of course, a very good one. Jesus said, it's the 89th Romeo, why do you wash the outside of the cup? Do you not understand that he who made the inside is also he who made the outside? In other words, don't be satisfied with the external activity, with external purity, but realize that that which is within is the center. Oh, here is a good one. 14th. Jesus said to them being the disciples, if you fast, you will beget sin for yourself. Now to tell that to a religious Jew takes a little bit of guts. And if you pray, you may be condemned. And if you give alms, you may do evil to your spirits. And if you go into any land and wander in the regions, if they receive you, eat what I set before you. Even if it's a beef steak, even if it's a nice big fat goose or a turkey at Thanksgiving time. So if you eat what I said before you, heal the sick among them, for what goes into your mouth will not defile you. But what comes out of your mouth, that is what will defile you. And this the last part of the saying is actually present in the New Testament as well. He is probably the most important of them all. Very, very short. Just a few words, a 40-second saying. Jesus said, become passers-by. What does that mean? Don't get stopped by what's going on. You keep going, keep going. Pass the enticements as well as the terrors of the external world by. And it sort of links up with other Gnostic scriptures, many of them. One of them being where somebody, one of the disciples is talking about Jesus, and he says, he was not caught. What do we mean? We have to be careful not to be caught by this one. Not by the nice and not by the non-nice, but what? Keep on going, keep on transforming, keep on changing, and then you will get somewhere. But if you are caught, then you have not passed by the obstacles which you are dealing with. Too many words. So this is then, I would say, the message. Be not bound by the law. Be not thwarted in your experience of the world by the stratagems of those powers that rule the world, who masquerade as lawgivers, while in truth they are our jailers. And this is a spiritual statement. I could apply it to some extent to governments, bygone. I lived under some of them, and I'm not going to refer to anything there. But be not bound by the temptation, on the other hand, of lawlessness, of the nihilistic enmeshment in disorder, because to be governed by disorder is worse than being governed by order. So, what should you be? What should we be? I think there are two words which are implicit and explicit in all the sayings of the Gospel of Thomas and be free, be free. Having seen the world, having been confronted like the heroes of the various great myths, we need to be free of the pressures, of the limitations, of the compulsions of our existence in this world. And I think that probably, even though we are dealing with two very different people, in two very different ages, I'm going to conclude, which I think he would have done if the Gospel of Thomas had been available to you, with some of the words of William Butler Yeats, the great poet, whose Gnostic vision we paid tribute to from time to time, by this little stanza of a poem which he wrote for an initiation in the Golden Dawn, for the initiation 784. But it is, I think, this is what the Master is speaking about in the Gospel according to Thomas. We are weighed down by the blood and the heavy weight of the bones. We are bound by flowers, and our feet are entangled in the green, and there is deceit in the singing of birds. It is time to be done with it all. The stars call and the planets, and the purging fire of the moon, and yonder is the cold silence of the cleansing night. May the dawn break, and gates of day be set wide open. Indeed, this is the eternal Gnostic desire, and the one that definitely is present in practically each and every one of the sayings of Thomas. May indeed the gates of day be set open. Indeed, as we have been promised of old, may it be so. So I thank you very much for this evening, and I'm so glad that you could come. And I've got a very interesting one for you next Friday. Thank you very much.